Hey guys, tonight, we drift into a world veiled in incense and steel, where prayer shares space with the clatter of hooves and swords are baptized in holy water. Picture the sunrise over Jerusalem, dust curling off stone roads, the smell of olive trees hanging heavy in the morning air. You're not just watching history, you're stepping into it. And as the golden light creeps across the Temple Mount, you see 9 knights kneel before a king, not for glory, but for something far stranger to swear poverty, chastity obedience, and to fight. You're probably not going to survive this, let's be honest. If the dysentery doesn't get you, the arrows probably will. But these knights, French, sunburned, and just a little crazy, believe they're on a divine mission. You're along for the ride. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this nightly dream travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1119. You kneel beside Hugh de Payens, he's not famous yet. Just a stubborn, thick-shouldered knight from Champagne. Around you, 8 other warriors lower their heads. There's no grand ceremony, no trumpets. Just a stone courtyard echoing with oaths and a few curious pigeons watching from the ledge of a ruined arch. This isn't how orders usually begin. There's no monastery, no abbey, not even a charter. Just a handful of idealists offering their swords to protect strangers on pilgrimage. But here's the kicker, they're pledging themselves not just to the road, but to something higher. Not a noble lord, not a king, but a spiritual idea. That Jerusalem, the city of peace, must be defended. Not by an army, but by a brotherhood. Hugh Grizzled from the First Crusade understands something most knights don't, that faith alone doesn't clear bandits from mountain passes. He knows the roads between Jaffa and the Holy Sepulchre are soaked with blood pilgrims, robbed, murdered, or worse. And he sees opportunity not for riches, but for redemption. In a world where the line between soldier and sinner is thin, Hugh dares to carve a third path, the soldier saint. So, what do you wear on this mad mission? Not much. You get a white cloak. Well, white is generous, more like ivory if you squint. And you and your buddy, you share a horse. Because you're that broke. 2 knights, 1 steed. Yes, it's as awkward as it sounds. Later this becomes your symbol, not gold, not lions. But 2 men riding together in poverty faith, and maybe a little saddle rash. And you patrol every single day. From the port city of Jaffa through the rocky ridges toward Jerusalem. Bandits know your face, some flee, some fight. You get bruised, burned, sun cracked, but something strange happens. Word spreads. Pilgrims start arriving in greater numbers. They talk about the knights who do not rob the guardians of the narrow road, the brothers with crosses and calluses. This tiny group becomes something more than men with swords. You become myth. But don't get ahead of yourself. Right now you're hungry. You're still considered weird by most clerics, heretical by a few, and irrelevant by many lords who think monks shouldn't touch weapons. No one's handing you castles or coins. Yet. Still you ride. Every day, every prayer, every blister. With your horse, your vow, and a strange sense that maybe, just maybe, the world is starting to notice. Historians still argue whether Hugh's real goal was to create a religious order or just a well-organized bodyguard company. But either way, the seed is planted, and it's growing. Quietly, steadily, like faith in motion, and you half asleep beneath Jerusalem's stars don't yet know that this humble little squad will one day own castles, bankroll kings, terrify popes, and get burned at the stake under a curse that may still echo. But for now, your sword is sharp, your oath is spoken, and the night is calm. You stir awake to the rustle of cold wind weaving through timber beams somewhere far from the Holy Land. Tonight, your dream shifts westward into the tangled forests and damp halls of 11th century Europe, a continent still crawling out of the Dark Ages and stumbling into its next obsession redemption through war. The world you live in smells of sweat soil and smoke. Kings are barely more powerful than their own barons. Castles are made of wood. Medicine involves leeches and crossed fingers. But amid the mess, something stirs an idea. Pilgrimage. A holy journey. A long walk toward God. You live in a time when faith isn't a belief, it's a geography. And Jerusalem. It's not just a place on a map, it's the heart of a cosmic drama. If Christ walked there, bled, there rose there, then maybe salvation lies along that same dusty road. And if walking that road cleanses the soul, what choice do you really have? But here's the catch. Feudal Europe is violent, unstable, and barely glued together by a common religion. You're a vassal to a lord who's a vassal to a duke, who's sworn to a king whose throne changes hands every few winters. Your armor is expensive. Your sword is rusty. Your loyalty is conditional. And if you're the second or third son, you're out of luck. No land, no future, no inheritance. So when Pope Urban II steps up at Clermont in 1095, waving his arms and practically yelling, "Let's go get Jerusalem," you listen. So do thousands of others, not because they love killing, but because killing for the right cause. That sounds like a ticket to heaven, or at the very least a way out of their mud-plastered villages. What Urban does at Clermont isn't just launch a war, it's launch an excuse. A divine loophole. You can kill and still be holy. You can die and still win. And most importantly, you can go east and come back as somebody. And let's not sugarcoat it. Some people do it for faith, yes. But others for land, gold, glory. Historians still argue whether the First Crusade was a spiritual movement hijacked by opportunists or a cynical political maneuver masked by piety. Either way it worked. Pilgrims became warriors. Crosses were sewn into tunics. Swords were blessed. And Europe's most dysfunctional family packed up for a road trip across empires. So, you march for weeks, months, through rain-mud disease. You bury friends along the way. You drink from rivers and dodge arrows from ambushes. And finally, in 1099, you arrive. Jerusalem shimmering in the haze. And then, the unthinkable. The walls fall, and the bloodletting begins. Let's not drift too gently here. What happens in Jerusalem is brutal. Even by medieval standards, even by Crusader standards. Muslims, Jews, civilians, the streets run red. An eyewitness says the blood reached the ankles. That's probably exaggerated. But not by much. It's a stain that won't wash out. Still, victory is declared. A Christian kingdom is carved out of conquered stone. Pilgrims rejoice. Knights are knighted. And most of the Crusaders, they go home. They did what they came to do. But a few stay behind. And they look around at this fragile, sun-scorched kingdom and ask, now what? Because the truth is, Jerusalem isn't secure. It's a city in the middle of enemies. Most of the countryside is still dangerous. And the road from the coast to the city, it's a death trap. Bandits, raiders, even bored locals looking to make a quick profit. Pilgrims who risked everything to walk where Christ walked are being slaughtered just outside the gates. And that's the world you wake up in tonight. Not the world of glorious conquest, but the messy aftermath. The long, hot days where idealism gives way to reality. You and the few who remain now carry the burden of keeping what others bled for. Of protecting the sacred not just from armies, but from thieves. It's not glamorous. It's not famous yet. But it's real. The sweat is real. The risk is real. And the need is urgent. So the seed of the Templars germinates not in glory, but in dust and danger. And as you polish your blade in the shade of Jerusalem's crumbling walls, you wonder, what would it mean to become both sword and psalm? You don't know it yet, but soon the world will find out. You awaken with sand stuck in your eyelashes and the distant clang of hooves on stone echoing up the hillsides. The road from Jaffa winds like a cracked ribbon through olive groves and ruined watchtowers. You're posted along that route now, saddle sore and sunburned, watching the horizon for bandits or worse. But this isn't some lonely vigil. You're not alone anymore. Not really. You've just joined something strange, new, and holy. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Catchy, right? Except no one really calls you that. Not yet. You're just those guys in white who keep getting mistaken for lunatics or monks. Or both. Hugh de Payens rides beside you. He doesn't talk much, but you can tell this is personal for him. He's been here before during the First Crusade. He remembers what it felt like to take Jerusalem, not just with swords, but with faith. And now, as pilgrims stumble into ambushes and rot in roadside ditches, he sees something just as urgent: protection, not conquest. So here you are, 9 knights, 1 mission, armed not just with swords, but with the strange conviction that you can be both monk and warrior. That poverty doesn't mean powerlessness. That chastity doesn't mean weakness. And that obedience, total, unquestioning obedience, might actually make you stronger than the bickering nobles and warlords who keep losing battles because no one listens. It's radical, it's laughable, and it's working. King Baldwin II sees potential. His kingdom is thin, his troops thinner. The hills around Jerusalem crawl with raiders. He needs help, and not the kind that asks for land in return. So he gives your little band a gift quarters inside the Temple Mount itself. You walk into those stone halls with mud on your boots and tremble in the presence of something bigger than yourselves. This place, once thought to sit atop the ruins of Solomon's temple, is more than a shelter. It's a symbol, a message. You're not just knights now, you're guardians of sacred ground. And you feel it in your bones, that the ground is watching you back. Historians still argue whether Baldwin gave you that space out of desperation or genuine belief in your mission. Either way, it changes everything. Overnight, your identity crystallizes. The name Templars takes root, and suddenly you're more than a patrol group. You're a prototype. But let's be clear, this isn't some grand operation. Not yet. You're broke. Like 2 knights, 1 horse broke. You share gear, your tunics are patched. Your food is mostly lentils and vague hope. But what you lack in material wealth, you make up for in unity. No one else in this city wakes up before dawn to pray and train before most people have wiped the sleep from their eyes. No one else has a rule that says you can't even touch a coin unless your superior tells you to. You don't get drunk. You don't chase women. You don't even raise your voice unless it's to chant the Psalms. And still, some people call you dangerous. Especially other monks who aren't thrilled about men who kill and pray. How, they ask, can violence serve God? A fair question. One you'll hear over and over again. But others are curious. Pilgrims talk. Merchants whisper. And more knights begin to arrive looking not for land, but for purpose. And here's the twist. The more you renounce power, the more it begins to find you. Your seal is a strange one, 2 knights on a single horse. A reminder of your poverty, maybe. Or maybe a deeper message that true strength lies not in wealth, but in solidarity. That you ride not alone, but as part of something larger. You pray 7 times a day. You train between prayers. You guard the roads. And little by little your reputation begins to spread. A knight who won't rob. A brother who won't break. A warrior who'd rather die than break a vow. You are confusing. You are inspiring. You are feared. And just beneath the surface of all this, a question simmers. What happens when men like this are no longer poor? But that's for another night. For now the sun sets over the Temple Mount. You fold your white cloak with care. Your blade rests beside your straw pallet. And as the desert wind hums through the stone halls, you sleep beside the ruins of Solomon, dreaming not of glory but of duty. You wake before dawn as always, your breath misting in the chill air of the stone-walled dormitory. You rub your eyes, stretch beneath the wool blanket, and swing your legs down onto the cold floor. No time to linger. The bell for matins will toll soon, and the rule does not bend for drowsy nights. Out in the corridor, cloaks rustle, and boots thud quietly on the flagstones. No one speaks. Silence is part of your rhythm now. Silence for focus. For discipline. For God. You file into the chapel with your brothers, white mantles over simple linen, the red cross stark even in the dim lamplight. Psalms echo through the vaulted ceiling, and your voice joins theirs, low, steady, unified. Not performance, not ceremony, obligation. This is what separates you. Not just the armor, or the rules, or the prayers, but the structure. Because this isn't just a lifestyle, it's an operating system. A human machine built on obedience and repetition. You don't wake up wondering what you'll do today. You already know. Because the Templar rule crafted under the guiding hand of Bernard of Clairvaux has mapped every moment of your life. When to eat, when to fight, when to pray, when to stay silent, when to die. And if that sounds suffocating, well, it kind of is. But that's the point. You have surrendered autonomy for clarity, desire for duty, and it works. Outside, the sun creeps over the horizon like a torch behind silk. It's training day. Sword drills in formation. Formation riding. Shield positioning. You practice not for flair, but for cohesion. Because unlike feudal armies, glorious disjointed messes that crumble when knights ride off, chasing personal glory, your strength lies in unity. No lone heroes here. No wandering champions. You move as one. Templars don't win because they're the strongest. They win because they don't break. Historians still debate whether your discipline came from belief, fear, or indoctrination. Probably a bit of all three, but the results are hard to deny. Even in peacetime, you prepare for siege. Even at prayer, your sword is near. The rule allows no flinching, no freelancing, and it works. Lunch is modest, stewed vegetables, bread, maybe meat if it's Tuesday, Thursday, or Sunday. You sit shoulder to shoulder at long wooden tables. No banter. A reader recites scripture as you eat. No one reaches for seconds without permission. You wash your bowl yourself. Then it's back to duty. Some days it's guard shifts. Some days it's escorting pilgrims through dangerous passes. Sometimes you're sent to repair a crumbling tower or count grain stores at a frontier outpost. The work is never glamorous, but it's steady, focused, and strangely soothing. Like holding a sword in both hands and knowing it was forged for something other than vanity. You remember when you used to be a different kind of knight, maybe back home in Aquitaine or Burgundy or Anjou. Flashier, lazier, richer, You had a horse with a silver bit and gloves embroidered by your mother. You jousted, you drank. You measured victory in applause and coin. But this is something else. There's no applause here. No damsels, no ballads. Just sun-scorched stone, the ache of repetition, and the strange, slow peace of knowing your choices are no longer your own. It sounds like a prison, but to you it feels like purpose. And yes, sometimes it wears you thin. You miss the world. You miss music. You miss the taste of pears in autumn and the feel of grass under bare feet. But you chose this. And in a world that rarely lets men choose anything, that choice means something. You've heard whispers that new knights are arriving from Europe, that the Pope himself is starting to notice, that donations are coming in coins, horses, even lands. You try not to think about what that means, about what wealth might do to your humble order, because right now you share a bed with 3 fleas a blade, with a nicked edge and a mission that no one else has dared attempt. And it's enough. As Compline ends, you kneel on the cold chapel floor, the candlelight softening the sharp stone. The voices rise one last time before silence returns. You whisper a prayer not for victory but for strength to keep showing up. You return to your cell, fold your cloak, and lie on your back, staring at the ceiling beams overhead. You are poor. You are anonymous. You are bound by rules tighter than armor. And yet, you are free. You're awakened by the slow clank of a gate being drawn open. Morning again. You're stiff from the stone floor, but used to it now. Your cloak is your blanket, your sword, your pillow. There's no complaining, not here. Not among brothers who have taken vows of poverty and obedience, and live every day with their lives arranged like beads on a rosary. But something is changing in the wind. You're not just a patrolman anymore. Not just a dusty knight guarding pilgrims from thieves. You're becoming part of something bigger, a machine that's catching the attention of kings and cardinals. And you feel it in how people look at you now. You used to be that odd, barefoot warrior monk. Now villagers bow when you pass. Nobles send letters begging to donate land. Churchmen who once scoffed now invite you to councils. You haven't changed your rule, your diet, or your daily schedule. But the world, it's noticing. And at the heart of this shift is a man with burning eyes and an unmatched gift for words, Bernard of Clairvaux. You meet him only once in passing in the cloister at Troyes, but his presence leaves a mark. A nephew of one of your founding brothers, Bernard, is no ordinary abbot. He walks barefoot, speaks with fire, and somehow manages to make self-denial sound like the most heroic adventure imaginable. He doesn't just defend your order, he rebrands it. He writes in praise of the new knighthood, and suddenly the world doesn't see you as a contradiction anymore. You're not a monk with the sword, you're a sacred weapon. A soldier with the soul. Historians still argue whether Bernard was genuinely inspired by your mission or just a genius strategist for church power. But either way, his words work. With his help, you're summoned to the Council of Troyes in 1129, a defining moment for your fledgling order. You remember the faces in that council, bishops in fine robes, scholars with ink-stained hands, the air heavy with incense and expectation. You're just a dusty knight among clerics and lords, but for once they listen. With Bernard's support, they grant your order official recognition. And more than that, a rule. Not just a vague set of expectations, but a full constitution. Pulled from Benedictine and Cistercian traditions, but tailored to your strange sword-bearing life. It spells out everything. When to pray. What to wear. How to eat. Who commands what. What happens if you break the rules. You study it like scripture, because it is scripture in a way, a gospel of behavior, discipline, and identity. It binds you together like chainmail. No more ad hoc band of roadside bodyguards. Now, you are the first officially sanctioned military religious order in Christian history, and you feel the shift. More brothers arrive, more horses, weapons, and coin. You get your first tailor, still humble, but now the white cloaks are uniform. The red cross, authorized by Pope Eugenius III, is stitched carefully onto each one. It represents martyrdom. You wear it not as fashion, but as prophecy. With church backing comes autonomy. You answer to no king, no bishop, only the Pope. That means when the local count wants to commandeer your castle, you can politely say no and mean it. When the bishop wants to take a peek at your treasury, you simply cross your arms and show him your papal exemption. This freedom is intoxicating and dangerous. You don't feel it yet. But later you'll look back and realize this is where the seeds were sown. The moment the order stopped being just a band of brothers and became an institution. But tonight, under the glow of a few scattered candles, you're not thinking about that. You're polishing your mail, whispering your evening prayers, and feeling for the first time that the world is starting to believe what you've known all along. That poverty is power. That obedience is armor. That discipline is holiness. You roll onto your side cloak, pulled tight, the cold floor pressing into your shoulder. And you sleep knowing that tomorrow when you rise, your footsteps won't just follow the rule. They'll define it. You stir before the bell. It's still dark, the stars above Jerusalem crisp and untouchable, but something tells you today is different. Not in what you'll do, your schedule never changes, but in what you've become. The rule has settled into your bones now. You don't question it anymore. When to wake, when to kneel, when to grip the hilt of your sword, it's all there stitched into your limbs like muscle memory. And yet, as you pull on your mantle and feel the weight of the red cross on your chest, you can't help but wonder, how did something so simple become something so big? Because you're not just a knight anymore, you're a symbol. A walking sermon. The white cloak with the red cross. It turns heads. Pilgrims bow. Lords defer. Even Muslim raiders, when they ambush your convoy, hesitate for just a second longer. And they should. Because by now the Templar Order is no longer just a local patrol force, it's becoming an international presence. Donations are pouring in. Not just coins, but lands. Castles in England, vineyards in Gascony, farmlands in the Rhineland. A few years ago you shared a horse. Now you have enough property to feed an army. And you kind of are. You've become something rare in the medieval world, an institution that spans borders, languages, and loyalties. The Templar seal those 2 knights on one horse is stamped on documents from Scotland to Sicily. It's become a passport, a talisman, a quiet threat. Wherever Christians travel, the Templars are known. You spend your morning patrolling a rough stretch between Ramla and Jerusalem. It's steep, bandit-prone, and hot. You've ridden this route dozens of times, but today the pilgrims you escort seem different. They look at you like you're more than muscle. Like you're protection from more than just blades. Like you're holy. That's flattering, but also uncomfortable. You remember what Bernard said in his writings, "The knight who bears the sword for Christ bears it justly." It's a powerful idea, one that silences critics who still wonder if monks should wield weapons. But it's also dangerous, because if you start to believe that everything you do is righteous by default, well, what happens when you're wrong? Historians still argue whether the Templars themselves believed they were above reproach, or whether they simply clung to the certainty the rule offered in a chaotic world. But you're just trying to stay alive, stay faithful, and not screw up, because the expectations are rising. With every new donation, every new recruit, every noble who kneels and offers land, the pressure tightens. You're no longer the underdog, you're the blueprint. Other orders are forming, now the Hospitalers, the Teutonic Knights, and they're looking at you like the big brother who's got it all figured out. But internally, you know the truth, the order is stretched thin. The mission is growing faster than the infrastructure. New brothers arrive who don't always understand the depth of the vows. Some come for the Red Cross, the status, the travel. And while they're sworn in the same way you were, you can feel it in your gut, not everyone's heart is as pure. So leadership tightens control. The rule becomes stricter. Beards trimmed precisely. Meals regulated to the ounce. Confessions required scrutinized and filed. You're no longer just a warrior monk. You're part of a bureaucracy. A machine of grace and governance. You spend the afternoon inspecting a hilltop outpost, checking its grain stores, talking with the young knight in command, reviewing the roster of patrols. It's not glamorous, but it's important. Because without oversight, the whole thing unravels. And despite the nobility of your mission, the truth is logistics win wars more than prayers do. As night falls, you kneel for compline in a small stone chapel, lit by flickering oil lamps. You murmur the psalms in Latin, your voice blending with the others, a choir of exhausted warriors who still believe after all this time that sacrifice is sacred. And maybe it is. Outside, the wind picks up and you pull your cloak tighter. A star streaks across the sky. You wonder briefly if it's a sign, but the rule doesn't encourage omens. It encourages discipline. So you finish your prayers, bow your head, and retreat to your cell. Your hands are cracked, your knees ache, but your heart is full. You sleep knowing that while the world shifts and kings fall, your purpose holds firm. You are a Templar now, and for better or worse, the world is watching. You awaken to the sound of hooves on stone and the scent of horse sweat in the warm Jerusalem air. The city still slumbers, but the Templar quarter is already alive with activity. New recruits arrived in the night fresh from Europe, blinking under the Middle Eastern sun like moths seeing fire for the first time. They've heard stories, myths. Some think they've joined God's chosen. Others think they've enlisted in an elite brotherhood. Most will soon realize they've signed up for neither comfort nor glory, but for obedience. You walk among them quietly. Some carry fine swords and wear new boots. You'll fix that. The rule doesn't allow for vanity. All blades look alike. All cloaks are identical. No colors, no crests. You are not your past. You are your vow. As you pass through the stables and the training yard, you notice the shift in scale. The order is growing fast. What began as 9 men has multiplied into hundreds, soon thousands. From Portugal to Hungary, nobles are sending sons and coin. Not all out of piety. Some are clearing inconvenient heirs. Others are buying indulgences. And yet the mission persists. The training yard rings with the sound of wooden practice swords. A sergeant shouts commands drilling new initiates in formation writing. You watch as a Flemish knight struggles to stay in line, used to charging at will, not moving as a unit. That's the hardest part for most of them. Not the prayers, not the early mornings, but the surrender of individuality. You remember your first week, the bruises, the silence, the hunger not for food but for a sense of identity inside the uniformity. You didn't think you'd last, but you did. And now you're the one doing the watching. With growth comes structure. You've been assigned the quartermaster team, cataloging the contents of the supply armory, distributing boots, checking inventory. Doesn't sound glamorous, right? But here's the secret: logistics win more wars than swords. An army with no boots walks nowhere. An army with no waxed bowstrings dies in the rain. You learn that fast. Meanwhile, the Order's leadership expands. The Grand Master remains at the top, but now you've got marshals for military operations, drapers to oversee clothing treasures to count coin, and commanders for each region. The Templars, once just a desert patrol group, have become a multinational organization. Some call it miraculous, some call it terrifying. Historians still argue whether this explosion in size was driven by necessity or ambition. You've seen both. The Holy Land needs protection, yes. But there's also a hunger in the leadership now, an itch to grow, expand, dominate, not just roads but realms. And yet the vow remains. Poverty, chastity, obedience. But poverty, that one's already getting a little fuzzy. You walk past the refectory and glance into the storehouse. There's cheese from Italy, wine from Bordeaux, spices from Alexandria. Nothing outrageous, but certainly not the lentils and leeks of your early years. A new brother jokes that the Templars are the only monks who eat better after taking a vow. You don't laugh, because you remember the old days. 1 horse for 2 men, mud for breakfast, and something about all this polished stone and imported parchment makes you uneasy. Still, you tell yourself it's necessary. Infrastructure, efficiency, expansion. After all, the rule is still followed. Prayers are still said, swords still sharpened, and pilgrims are still protected. You spend the evening watching the sun slip behind the hills. A column of dust on the horizon tells you another patrol is returning. Likely tired, thirsty, sunburnt. But alive. Another caravan escorted. Another set of pilgrims safely delivered. The mission at its core still pulses. But in the darkening chapel, as you kneel for vespers, a thought slips into your mind. When does structure become bureaucracy? When does growth become greed? You banish the thought. That's not your place. You are not a philosopher. You are a brother. A sword, a prayer in motion. Still, you notice things. And as you lie on your straw mattress cloak, drawn over your shoulders, you wonder quietly, how long can a vow hold against the tide of success? The candle gutters. You sleep. You rise to a sky already turning silver blue, the kind of pre-dawn quiet that makes even your armor seem hushed. Today begins like every other matins, then mass, then a meal of bread dipped in lukewarm broth. But by the time you lace your boots, you feel it a subtle tension in the air, like a string pulled too tight. The Templars are growing, yes, but not just in numbers. In influence. And with influence comes something no knight is trained for: politics. You wouldn't call yourself a politician. Most of your brothers wouldn't either, but the truth is, by the mid-12th century, the Templars have become more than a military order. You're now a geopolitical player. Kings whisper your name with both respect and caution. Nobles fund you, rely on you, and quietly resent you. And the church, well, they both bless you and watch you. Closely. Take your presence in the Crusader states, those patchwork kingdoms carved out of sand and blood after the First Crusade. There's the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and a few others clinging to rocky terrain like stubborn shrubs in a desert storm. Each has its own politics, its own ambitions, and its own ways of using you. You remember riding out near Tripoli, where Count Raymond II granted you land near key mountain passes. Strategic, vital, vulnerable. And with that land came responsibility. You built castles, staffed garrisons, patrolled for raiders, but you also started collecting rents, negotiating with local farmers, settling disputes. In some places, the Templars are no longer just knights, you're landlords. And that's where things get tricky. Because now you're not just serving the king, you're competing with him. You hear it in court. The Templars don't pay royal taxes. The Templars won't send troops unless it serves their interest. And it's true, your exemption from secular control granted by the Pope himself gives you incredible autonomy. But to the kings and counts struggling to hold their kingdoms together, that autonomy feels a lot like insubordination. Historians still argue whether the Templars helped stabilize the Crusader states or quietly undermined them with independent policy. But you've seen both. You've watched a Templar commander refuse to obey a royal order because he claimed it would endanger pilgrims. He might have been right. He also might have just disliked the king. The balance is delicate. Then there's the locals, Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians. You were taught to see them as other, but after years here you begin to realize something no vow ever prepares you for coexistence. Trade continues. Treaties are signed. Prisoners are exchanged. You've even shared a meal with the Saracen emir, once flatbread goat stew, a cautious nod across the fire. War and diplomacy dance together here, and sometimes your blade stays sheathed not because you've lost the will to fight, but because you've gained the wisdom not to draw first. But not all your brothers agree. Some want constant battle. They see compromise as weakness. Others lean toward cautious coexistence, recognizing that survival might depend more on negotiation than slaughter. These divisions run deeper than you admit, between old crusaders and newcomers, between Eastbourne Franks and freshly arrived Western zealots, between those who want to protect and those who want to conquer, and in the middle the Templars. You find yourself increasingly caught in the web. One day you're escorting pilgrims. The next you're mediating a dispute between a Latin prince and a local Armenian bishop. The day after that you're leading a raid on a rogue bandit group that once paid taxes to the crown. You didn't sign up for this, but here you are. And then there are the Hospitallers, your supposed sister order, founded to care for sick pilgrims. They've grown too. Gained castles, soldiers, influence, and slowly they've become your rivals. You've clashed over territory, donations, even theological interpretations of what it means to serve. More than once it's taken a papal decree to stop open conflict. You nod politely in their presence, but you know they're watching you just as closely as the kings do. You pray Vespers tonight with the weight of it all pressing on your shoulders. You join to protect, to serve, to surrender your will to a higher cause. But somewhere between the battlements and the bishoprics, the Red Cross has started to mean different things to different people. Power, influence, wealth. And while your hands are still calloused and your feet still blistered, the rooms you guard are no longer just chapels. They're throne rooms, vaults, diplomatic chambers. The order has become necessary. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous thing of all. You wake before the bell. Again. Your body still aches from yesterday's patrol, but your mind is already racing. Because today you've been reassigned not to guard duty or escort detail, but to something much quieter. Much stranger. You'll spend the next few weeks stationed in the scriptorium. Copying ledgers, not scriptures, not battle maps. ledgers. You walk into the low candlelit hall where parchment rustles louder than armor ever did. Rows of brothers sit hunched over ink-stained desks, scratching records into the fabric of memory donations. Received properties, managed tolls, collected debts, forgiven or not. This, you quickly realize, is where the real power of the Order lives. Not on the battlefield, not on the road, but in ink. You once thought the Templars were just knights. You were wrong. They're clerks, accountants, secretaries of a growing empire that doesn't rely solely on swords, but on records. And it all starts to make a strange sort of sense. Because as your order grew, so did its responsibilities. Land needed stewards, fortresses needed quartermasters, and with pilgrim traffic booming and donations surging in from across Europe, someone had to track it all. That someone is you now. You're still a knight, yes. You still wear the white cloak and the red cross. But during these hours you wield not a sword but a quill. And as you scrawl the name of a new land grant from an English baron into the Book of Holdings, you begin to understand something far more profound. The pen is a weapon. Historians still argue whether the Templars meant to become administrators or simply adapted out of necessity. But as you sit here with your fingers stained black and your knees sore from the prayer bench, you can feel the transformation happening. And it's not just internal. The kings of Europe have noticed too. The French crown now stores royal treasures at your temple in Paris. English monarchs borrow your ships, your vaults, even your financial advisors. You've become something like a medieval central bank, only holier and more heavily armed. In London, nobles refer to your chapter house as the New Temple. And when King John needed a secure location for the Magna Carta negotiations, he chose it not because it was beautiful, but because it was yours. Impenetrable, trusted, feared. That's the paradox. You're trusted because you're feared. Feared because you answer to no king. Only the Pope. And even he sometimes hesitates before issuing orders, knowing full well that your network now stretches from Scotland to Sicily. From your candlelit scriptorium, you watch it happen on parchment castles, deeded over vineyards gifted in perpetuity. Entire villages willed to the order in exchange for prayers and spiritual protection. And bit by bit, you see what the order is becoming. You who once shared a horse with a fellow knight now manage properties worth more than some kingdoms. You who once couldn't afford a spare tunic now sign off on repairs to entire ports. The irony doesn't escape you. You took a vow of poverty, and now you oversee an organization whose holdings rival those of the aristocracy. But the rule still stands. You own nothing. Even your boots belong to the order. Your salary is eternal salvation, that's it. Still, not every brother can keep that vow unshaken. You see it sometimes in their eyes. The new recruits from noble families, they struggle. Some come with expectations, others with ambition. So the leadership grows stricter. Punishments for vanity, expulsions for disobedience, public penance for pride. A brother who hoards an extra candle is shamed in front of all. Because if you lose the rule, you lose the order. You finish your day reviewing shipment logs for a convoy headed to Acre. Salted meat, clean water, spare tunics, horseshoes. The math has to be perfect. Pilgrims depend on it. Soldiers depend on it. The whole mission depends on it. And as you close the ledger, seal it with wax, and stand up stiff-legged from the bench, you realize something humbling. Maybe this too is holy work. Not just swinging a blade in the name of Christ, but counting sacks of grain, recording acres of land, writing history one number at a time. Because the Templar Order isn't just a fighting force, it's a system. And tonight you are one cog in a vast and sacred machine. You wake not to a trumpet or a prayer bell, but to the steady groan of timber wheels grinding across stone. A supply caravan has arrived from the port of Tyre, and with it a reminder that the Templars are no longer just warriors or administrators. You're merchants now, shipmasters, supply chain engineers with rosaries. You pull on your cloak and step into the courtyard. Dust clings to everything, the crates, the horses, your own tongue. The caravan has stacked high bolts of wool amphora, of oil bundles, of iron-tipped arrows, and curiously barrels marked with seals from Sicily and Cyprus. Trade goods. Some meant for the order, some meant for profit. Profit. A word that once felt sacrilegious now rides beneath every ledger you touch. You remember when pilgrims used to arrive with nothing but prayers and a few copper coins. Now they come with promissory notes issued from commanderies in France, Italy, even Scotland. They hand you a slip of parchment, you hand them local currency. It's clean, efficient, divine bookkeeping, and it's catching on. Kings have noticed, merchants too. Because while your sword arm still guards the roads, your financial arm now bridges oceans. The Order has become the medieval world's most trusted transfer service, an armored Western Union powered by vows and Latin script. This system, elegant and simple, revolutionizes long-distance travel. No more chests of coins strapped to the backs of sweating squires. Just a sealed letter stamped with the Templar seal and a silent promise we will make good on this. And you do. Historians still argue whether this innovation was invented purely for safety, or whether the Order anticipated the banking model it became. Either way, it works, and it's making you not just feared, but indispensable. You spend the morning checking manifests and ensuring the right goods go to the right preceptories. A crate of armor bound for Tripoli, saddle leathers headed to Crac des Chevaliers, wine for the brothers at Acre, measured of course by the rule's limitations, no drunkenness even in celebration. Especially in celebration. And yet there's a contradiction you can't shake. You live by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But you now command enough financial resources to rival small kingdoms. Your poverty is protected by fleets. Your obedience answers only to Rome. And your chastity, well, that one's holding steady, but some of the new recruits from Florence seem a little less convinced. You don't say anything, but you feel the tension growing. The difference between the letter of the vow and the spirit of the vow. You stop at the treasury on your way back to the chapel. A fortified chamber beneath your chapter house guarded by silent brothers who nod only once as they let you pass. Inside, thick ledgers lie open. Gold coins from England, silver from Castile, exotic fabrics from the Levant, all accounted for stacked measured. The smell of wax, ink, and iron fills the air. And in the corner, a coffer labeled King Louis IX Private Deposit. You stare at it. Not because it's unusual royals regularly store their wealth with you, but because it's so normal now. The Order was built to protect pilgrims. Yet here you are, safeguarding the fortunes of monarchs, managing investments, collecting interest through clever loopholes that avoid the church's prohibition on usury. Some call it divine stewardship. Others call it spiritual hypocrisy, wrapped in papal exemptions. You don't know what to call it anymore. That evening you stand watch from the battlements. Below, torches light up the walls. Beyond them, the desert stretches toward darkness. Somewhere out there, caravans ride under your protection. Ships sail bearing your banner. Nobles sleep easier because their coin lies beneath your vaults. And the people murmur, The Templars, they are incorruptible. Are you... You clutch your cloak tighter against the wind. The rule still binds you. But the world outside that rule is creeping in step by step like sand through the cracks of a fortress gate. You close your eyes and whisper a prayer, not just for strength, but for clarity, because as the order grows stronger, the line between duty and dominion is blurring. And while the world sees you as knights of unshakable virtue, you're starting to wonder who holds the greater power now. The Templar knight with a sword, or the one with the key to the vault. The morning sun filters through stained glass and cold stone, throwing red and gold shadows across your boots as you kneel for Mass. You're not in Jerusalem now. You're in Paris, deep inside the towering walls of the temple, a fortress monastery so well defended that even the king's guards lower their eyes when they pass. This is no dusty outpost. This is the stronghold, the beating heart of the order in the West, and it feels different. Here things are polished. The vaults below hold more gold than you've ever seen. Ledgers stretch longer. The brothers wear the same white mantles, yes, but the silence here is less monastic, more calculated. You begin to understand something that most knights in the East never do. This is where real power lives now. Outside these walls, nobles squabble, merchants haggle, and kings kneel, sometimes literally to ask for loans. Because Paris is not just a commandery, it's a treasury, an embassy, a banking headquarters, an invisible lever beneath the weight of nations, and you're one of its cogs. Today you've been asked to assist the treasurer, a promotion of sorts, or a test. You're not told which. You're handed a roster of deposit accounts, dukes, abbots, even foreign dignitaries, and tasked with balancing them against withdrawals and land claims. The sums are staggering. Some families have entrusted their entire estates to the order's stewardship. You ink careful lines, convert currencies, notate exchange rates, and with every tick of the quill you feel it more the power of trust. Not the flashy kind. This isn't battlefield glory, but something deeper. Systemic. When people believe your records more than they believe their own cousins, you are no longer just soldiers. You are infrastructure. Historians still argue whether this financial expansion was a natural evolution or a conscious pivot away from spiritual duty. But inside this stone chamber surrounded by sealed ledgers and iron-bound chests, it hardly matters. Because the result is the same, the Templars have become Europe's most reliable institution. You walk through the archives during your break, not for leisure, but to learn. Documents line the shelves. Original deeds, contracts, letters sealed with wax long faded. A letter from the Pope. Another from the Doge of Venice. And unexpectedly, a record of negotiations with a Muslim trader from Aleppo. Goods exchanged, services rendered, payment received. It occurs to you we are doing business with our supposed enemies. But is that hypocrisy or survival? The rule never said you couldn't be pragmatic. And if your fleet needs sails and only Damascus can supply the canvas, what's a monk to do? By afternoon, the hall is bustling. A delegation has arrived from England, envoys of King Henry. They need funds transferred, quickly, quietly, safely. No one trusts the royal treasury, but everyone trusts you. And as you assist in arranging the transaction, you realize just how far the order's reach has grown. From a dirt road outside Jaffa to the counting tables of kings. From sandals and salt bread to feather pens and ledgers thicker than armor. And yet, the vows remain. You sleep in a shared dormitory. You eat plain food. You pray. You never touch the gold. Not even to count it. That task belongs to appointed clerics with papal permission. Still, the contradiction pulses under the surface. You hear it in the jokes the younger brothers whisper when they think the senior knights are out of earshot. Vow of poverty, eh? Funny how poor people don't need armed guards for their coin chests. You don't laugh. You've seen the temptation grow alongside the coin piles. And while most remain disciplined, some have started to bend. Slightly, quietly. A new saddle here, a bit of silk lining under a surcoat there. It's nothing they say, but it's always nothing. Until it's not. That evening, as you light a candle in the chapel, you wonder what Hugh de Payens would think if he walked into this Paris commandery now. Would he fall to his knees in gratitude, or stare hollow-eyed at what his humble brotherhood has become? You don't know. You only know that tomorrow you'll be handed more ledgers, more titles, more transactions cloaked in Latin and bound by ribbons. You'll file them dutifully, and pray hard that the Red Cross stitched to your chest still means what it once did. Not just protection, but purpose. You wake to bells that are not yours. They ring outside the temple walls from the cathedral across the Seine. Paris hums with morning vendors, shouting carts, clattering pigeons, scattering in whirls of feathers, but inside the commandery it's all marble calm and echoing steps. You've been stationed here for nearly a month now, and the contrast still jars you. Outside chaos. Inside order. Perfect, polished order. But something's shifting. At breakfast, a younger knight leans toward you and whispers what everyone else is already murmuring behind their wine cups and morning prayers. The king is watching us. King Philip IV of France called the fair, though few say it with affection, has begun asking questions. Not open accusations, just questions about your properties, your wealth, your exemptions, your allegiance, and most disturbingly, your purpose. He's asked how much gold the Templars keep, how many castles you own, why you answer to the Pope, not the crown. These aren't theological inquiries, they're fiscal ones, and fiscal inquiries in royal hands often lead to iron keys and executioners. You spend the day going through treasury inventories, updating logs with an unease you can't quite name. Everything's above board, but you feel it the way even your fellow brothers now second guess what gets written down. Who counts what? Where those numbers end up. And all the while beyond the temple walls, the king tightens his grip. Historians still argue whether Philip truly believed the rumors he would later spread, or whether it was all theater, a masterstroke of political strategy to seize the Templar treasury and erase a debt he could never repay. What you know is this money changes everything, especially when it doesn't belong to the king. In the afternoon, you're sent to meet with the church envoy. Officially, it's just a routine update. Unofficially, it feels more like a temperature check. The clergy want to know, are the Templars still pure, still disciplined, still humble? You smile. You answer honestly. But inside, something rattles. Because here's the truth. The order is no longer what it was. It's bigger, richer, heavier with expectation and scrutiny. You used to count time by the hour of prayer. Now you count it in balances and inventories and favor owed. You used to fear God. Now you fear auditors. And still you ride out in white. That evening you take patrol around the outer courtyard. The stone feels colder than usual under your boots. A line of wagons is being loaded grain parchment wool, destined for another commandery in Burgundy. You check the manifest. Everything's in order. Of course it is. The Templars are efficient. That's the whole problem. Because when you're this efficient, this autonomous, this untouchable, people start wondering what you're hiding. The younger brothers don't see it yet. They still speak with fire in their eyes, eager to go east to fight for Jerusalem to make their mark. But Jerusalem has fallen. The Crusader states are crumbling, and no one sent new legions in years. You're knights without a battlefield, so you occupy space in boardrooms. You argue over vineyards. You lend money to monarchs and correct Latin in contracts. And in the absence of a holy war, some start looking for a holy target. That night, you light a candle in your cell and stare at the flame far longer than usual. You remember the stories of the early days when knights starved together in the sand, sharing a single mount, a single cloak, a single dream. Now, you share financial ledgers with kings who'd happily bury you if it meant dodging repayment. You whisper your prayer more slowly than usual, not because you've lost faith, but because you've gained awareness. Something is coming, you don't know what, but you can feel it, and you're not sure a sword will be enough this time. You rise to a silence that feels too heavy. There's no bustle in the halls, no whispered jokes between brothers, no sound of hooves in the courtyard. Just a long, low quiet that wraps around the Paris commandery like a tightening rope. And deep inside, you know why. The rumors are no longer whispers. They're proclamations. King Philip has made his move. The order is accused publicly, dramatically, and in lurid detail. Heresy, blasphemy, idolatry. The kind of charges that stick not because they're proven, but because they're spectacular. Kissing the devil's backside, spitting on the cross, worshipping a disembodied head named Baphomet. You almost laugh because it's so absurd, but you don't, because this isn't a joke. It's a noose. The king's men arrive with torches and warrants not to question you, but to confiscate. Ledgers, seals, coin. You are informed, not asked, that your vaults will be sealed for investigation. Some brothers protest, others freeze. A few are dragged out in chains before the noon bell has even rung. You're not surprised, you're angry. Because you've seen the accounts. Balanced, transparent. You've lived the rule. Chaste, obedient, poor. You've slept on stone floors and bled into foreign dirt for a mission you still believe in. And now you're a villain in the court of public opinion. Historians still argue whether Philip's accusations were driven by greed, paranoia, or genuine fear of your power. But within the order, the conclusion is swift. This is about money. You hold too much, own too much, influence too many, and worst of all, you owe the king nothing. And kings don't like being in debt. You spend the day helping the commander seal documents, hide what few items of spiritual or financial value can be smuggled away. Not for profit, for protection. You know what's coming. You can feel the sharp bureaucratic cruelty of it taking shape. And then late that night, a knock at your cell door. Not the gentle knock of a brother, the heavy-knuckled pound of royal guards. You're taken from your bed with no explanation. Shackled, hooded, and dragged down stone corridors you once walked freely. They don't beat you. They don't even speak. But the silence is worse. You're thrown into a chamber below the temple's foundations. A place you didn't even know existed. It smells of mildew and forgotten oaths. Straw covers the floor. A single candle flickers on a shelf above a rusty chain. You're not alone. 3 brothers are already there, filthy, dazed, trembling. One stares straight ahead, lips moving in silent prayer. Another mutters curses under his breath. The third just cries. They've been tortured, not just for information, but for confessions, forced to repeat back falsehoods etched by royal scribes, statements about secret rituals, obscene rites, mythical idols. You try to comfort them, but they flinch when you speak. It breaks your heart, because these men once rode with you, shared your bread, guarded your back on cliffside passes and burning plains. Now they're shadows. You sit in the dark and wait your turn. Because there will be a turn. This isn't justice, it's theater. And you are part of the script. You whisper the psalms under your breath the way you did in the Holy Land under siege. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, only this valley, it's beneath the very city you swore to protect. Above you, Paris continues to breathe. Citizens carry on. Nobles sip their wine. And somewhere in the royal palace, the king congratulates himself on crushing a threat to his authority, because you were never the real danger. Your independence was. And now that independence is being snuffed out, not with swords, but with parchment and ink and the soft echoing clang of locked doors. You close your eyes and try to sleep on the straw. Your wrist burn, your chest aches, but your faith still intact. For now. You wake to screaming, not yours, not yet. It's the brother in the next cell. You can't see him, just the sound of a voice unraveling. Shouts turning to sobs. Sobs collapsing into silence. You don't know what they did to him. You only know the guards didn't flinch. Your own interrogation begins before sunrise. You're taken up cold stone steps past damp walls, scratched with initials, some familiar, some lost. At the top, a narrow chamber awaits. No grand inquisition, no judge's bench. Just a chair, ropes, a clerk with ink-stained fingers, and a Dominican friar whose eyes have long since forgotten mercy. He asks you if you've ever denied Christ. You blink. You shake your head. He nods, as if expecting that, then gestures to the ropes. You're given a choice: confess or be shown the instruments of correction. You choose silence. And so they begin. They never call it torture. Not officially. The word they prefer is persuasion. A persuasive turn of the rack. A convincing plunge into icy water. A motivational crushing of toes. All in the name of truth. And when your voice finally cracks, not in betrayal, but in raw pain, they lean in. Did you worship a demon? A cat, you barely understand the question, but your silence is rewritten as admission. The clerk dips his pen and records your hesitations as guilt. This is not a trial, this is a play with one ending. By the time they're done, you're not sure what hurts more, your joints or your heart. You're thrown back into the cell. No bandages, no words. Just the stink of rot and the weight of shame. One of the brothers is missing. No one says it, but you know. He didn't survive persuasion. Historians still argue whether confessions extracted under such torment should ever have been recorded as truth, but the king didn't care. He had scrolls now, witnesses, proof, and he had the Pope. Well, a pope. Clement V, caught in a web of debt and diplomacy, had moved the papacy to Avignon, uncomfortably close to Philip's long reach. There were pleas for caution, for inquiry, but in the end, pressure wins. The Pope orders a formal investigation, and suddenly all across Europe Templars vanish. Not in battle, not in glory, in chains. Hundreds are arrested. Their commanderies seized, gold and grain carted away under the guise of piety. Some die under torture, others die in despair. The public, once awed by your purity, now whispers of heresy, of hidden rites, of curses and oaths made in darkness. It spreads like smoke through a dry city. You spend your days in silence now. Not out of discipline, but because there's nothing left to say. The guards no longer jeer. The friars no longer bother with questions. You've served your role in the pageant. Now you're just a relic. One afternoon, a lay clerk enters your cell with a paper. He says it's a pardon. Conditional. Sign it and you'll be released into a monastery. Not free, but out of the dungeon. The catch. You must publicly affirm your guilt. You stare at the paper for a long time, because the ache in your bones says yes. The weight in your heart says no. Eventually you take the quill, but instead of signing, you set it down. Gently, deliberately. You don't deny Christ. You don't admit to demons. You just stand. The clerk sighs, folds the paper, leaves. That night a rat crawls across your leg. You don't move. You're thinking of Acre, of Jerusalem, of your first ride under the Red Cross dust in your mouth, hope in your chest. You still remember the words of the rule. Not to be served, but to serve. The world may have forgotten what that means, but you haven't. You dream of wind, of open fields and hooves thundering over earth, of the clang of your sword on a Saracen's blade and the sting of sweat in your eyes. You dream of brotherhood of purpose, of that first time you saw the Red Cross stitched onto a white mantle and thought, this means something. Then you wake, and remember where you are. The cell is dark but not silent. Somewhere down the corridor a brother is whispering a hymn under his breath. Another is coughing slow, rattling the kind of cough that doesn't get better. You count the bricks in the wall, again. You know them all by now. There's a crack in the 7th one from the left that looks like a crossbow. It's been months. Your body's thinner. Your beard is longer. Your faith somehow still intact. Bent, not broken. Because if they thought this would erase you, they misunderstood the very thing they feared. Faith isn't in vaults or castles. It's in bones. Outside, the trials continue. Not just in France now, but across Europe. Portugal, England, Aragon, even Germany. Everywhere the Templars once walked freely, now they're watched. Investigated, disbanded. Confessions tumble out under torture, then are recanted under breath. But no one listens to recantations. Only testimony. The world wants blood, or closure, or a scapegoat. Historians still argue whether the other kingdoms truly believed the charges or simply went along to avoid offending France and to grab a piece of the pie. Templar properties are valuable after all. Commanderies come with vineyards, farmland, silver mines. Who wouldn't want a free estate with the side of absolution? But not everyone complies. In some places, kings refuse to arrest the brothers. In others, trials are held, but no evidence is found. Still, the pressure grows. No ruler wants to be seen harboring heretics, especially ones with better accountants. Meanwhile, within your cell, time becomes abstract. There are no seasons here, only the slow erosion of identity. You used to be a knight. Now you're just a name on a list, a soul in limbo. One morning they call you out again. No rack this time, no questions, just a procession. You and several other brothers are escorted under guard to a church courtyard open air. Sunlight like a slap after the dark. A crowd has gathered, some cheer, others jeer. A few just stare. This is not an execution. It's a confession. Or at least that's what they expect. The friar reads a prepared statement, the same one you refused to sign. He asks you now in public if you will repeat it. You look up and see the others. Some are broken. Faces down, lips trembling, they nod and recite the lies. One begins to weep before he even starts. But beside you, one brother old, battered, his eyes sharp despite the bruises, steps forward and says only, I have lied enough. Today I speak the truth. The order is innocent, I go to God clean. Gasps, then silence. The guards grab him, drag him back, but not before the crowd hears. You are asked again, and again you say nothing, because truth like steel is tempered in silence. That night back in your cell you hear nothing from the brother who spoke. Rumors swirl he's been taken to another prison, or executed, or buried alive. No one knows. But his words linger. You begin to wonder if we die in chains but live in truth. Have we won? You don't know. But you feel something change. Not outside. Not in the courts or scrolls, but inside. You realize the Red Cross is not the order. The vaults are not the order. The Pope is not the order. You are the faith in your chest, the oaths in your bones, the prayers you whisper when no one is listening. They can take everything. But not that. Not unless you hand it over. You awaken with the start not from pain, but from a voice. Familiar. Steady. Clear in the echoing dark. Brothers, we will not kneel to lies. It's Demole, the Grand Master. They've kept him hidden from most of you, isolated, interrogated, paraded about as a broken man to validate the king's farce. But now, after years in chains, he has spoken publicly, refused to recant, stood not as a relic, but as a rock. Word reaches your cell through the cracks, the crevices of stone, and whisper the Grand Master has withdrawn his confession. Not in secret, on a scaffold, in front of Paris. He declared the order innocent of all charges and demanded judgment from a higher court, God's alone. The words must have echoed like thunder through the square, especially to those who expected a quiet, compliant end to the charade. You feel something inside you surge, not hope. That word has long since worn thin. But something fiercer, older, resolve. Historians still argue whether Demole meant to go out in flames that day, whether he had accepted his fate long before the torch was ever lit. But to those of you still behind walls and iron, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he stood. The king's men responded swiftly. There was no further trial, no delay. They lit the fire that very evening. You weren't there to see it, but you've heard the tale repeated like scripture by those who watched from alleys and rooftops. They say Demole didn't scream, that he held his gaze steady toward Notre Dame, and as the flames coiled around him shouted one final prophecy that Pope Clement and King Philip would join him in death before the year was out. You don't know if it's true, but both men did die soon after. And in the eyes of the people, that's enough. The prophecy takes root. You spend the next days with your hands folded and your back straight, not because the guards are watching, but because your spine remembers how to be proud again. You still wear rags, you still eat rot, but your posture has changed. You hear whispers beyond the prison now. Merchants muttering doubts, scribes second-guessing their records, monks asking questions they once feared to form. Why were the Templars really destroyed? The official story still blares from pulpits. Heresy, corruption, secrecy. But in the taverns and the markets, in the silent space between prayers, people speak a different truth. That the Templars were too rich, too independent, too untouchable. That Philip envied your vaults, that Clement feared your loyalty, that the world preferred a convenient villain to a disciplined force it couldn't control. Some even call the order martyrs now, saints of principle, soldiers of conscience. It's strange to be praised after death. You think back to that first morning in Jerusalem, dust in your mouth and eyes full of purpose. You were naive then, brave but blind. Now you see clearly. The sword you once carried could slice flesh, but the discipline behind it, that could shake kingdoms. And that's why they had to silence you, but they didn't destroy you. Not really. Because in Portugal, the remaining brothers were quietly folded into a new order, the Order of Christ. In Spain, others morphed into local branches with different names but the same bones. Even in France, your archives didn't all burn. Some were hidden, protected, preserved. You've become legend. You've become warning. And perhaps that's more powerful than any fortress. That night you lie on your straw pallet and dream again not of war but of balance. Of a world where faith walks beside wisdom, where swords serve truth, where vows are kept even if the world forgets them. You may die in this cell, but the order lives on, in whispers, in stonework, in memory. And as long as one soul remembers that Red Cross and what it once stood for, not in gold, not in politics, but in purpose, you have not been defeated. You have simply been transformed. You no longer count the days. What's the point? The sun rises, but you rarely see it. The seasons shift, but in the depth of this prison, only the cold really changes, sometimes bone deep, sometimes merely skin tight. And yet something is different now. A guard hands you bread with averted eyes. Another leaves your water without the usual shove or sneer. One even mutters under his breath, "You didn't deserve this." Not long ago they spat at your feet. Now they seem ashamed. Because outside the world has begun to see through the smoke. Not all at once, not in public, but slowly, steadily. The same scribes who once copied your confessions are now penning doubts. The same friars who condemned you in sermons now avoid the topic entirely, and the people they talk. Oh, do they talk? They whisper that the trials were rigged, that the king wanted your lands, that the Pope, too weak to stand alone, danced to France's tune. And most of all, they whisper that the Templars didn't vanish, that they adapted. Historians still argue whether those whispers are true, whether splinter groups carried on your legacy under new names, or whether it's just romantic legend spun in the taverns of Europe. But either way, the Order now lives in a kind of twilight half-memory, half-myth. Perhaps that's safer. You're transferred quietly without ceremony. Not to freedom, but to a monastery in the countryside. A kind of exile cloaked in mercy. The friars there are silent. They neither accuse nor console, but they let you eat, let you sleep, let you breathe. It feels like betrayal to enjoy it. You wake each morning before the bell, as you always have. You kneel, you pray, you scrub your own robes. When asked you help in the garden, your calloused hands suddenly awkward with trowels instead of swords. A boy from the village brings you news. He doesn't know who you were, just that you're the quiet monk from the north. You ask him about the city. He shrugs. The king's dead, he says. So is the Pope. People say the Templars cursed them. You smile but say nothing. Let them believe in curses if it brings them comfort. But you know better. What killed Philip and Clement wasn't witchcraft or divine wrath, it was fear. The fear that righteous power cannot be bought. That truth once planted grows stubborn roots. You spend your days in service now, not to a military order, but to old monks with bad knees and gardens that won't weed themselves. You carry buckets. You chase goats. You raid when there's light and carve prayers into wood when there isn't. And at night when the others sleep, you sit by the chapel and stare at the stars through a cracked window. Once those stars guided you across oceans. Now they guide your memory. You remember your first comrade, his laughter, the way he prayed with his whole body. gone now. You remember Jerusalem when it was still yours, when the sky burned red over the ramparts, and you thought God could be touched just by reaching upward. You remember the vaults, the ledgers, the silence that came when the gold piled higher than the prayers. You remember the cell, and you remember Demole burning with the voice stronger than most men have in life. It's strange. You've lost everything, your title, your rank, your brothers, your sword. And yet, you've never felt more like a Templar, because the world can seize your name. It can melt your seal. It can tear your banner and silence your chapel bell. But it cannot erase your vow. You were not called to comfort. You were called to serve. And here in the dirt beneath the stars and the silence, you are still doing exactly that. You're planting onions when it happens. A traveling friar face, sunburned and robes dusty, arrives at the monastery bearing scrolls and murmurs. You barely look up, messengers come and go, and most bring only bureaucratic debris. But later that evening, the abbot invites you into his quarters. That never happens. He offers you a stool. Gestures to a document on the table. It bears the papal seal. Your hands hover over it before touching it, half afraid, half reverent. It's not addressed to you, but the contents are clear. The Order of the Knights Templar is officially dissolved. By papal decree, legal, final, eternal. You read it again slowly. The words thud in your chest like a closing door. You knew this was coming, of course you did. The trials, the confiscations, the silence from Rome, it all pointed here. But seeing it written, inked in Latin with a flourish of crimson wax stings like a betrayal whispered by God himself. You are officially no longer a Templar. And yet, how strange. The world says the order is dead, but you are still breathing. Still waking before dawn. Still praying the same hours, still keeping your boots aligned beneath the bed. Still reaching for that invisible sword that no longer exists. The abbot watches you. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The silence says everything. The next morning you dig deeper in the soil than usual. The earth is stubborn this time of year, like the truth. Hard to unearth, harder still to plant something new in its place. You think about how they ended it. How Pope Clement, in a room full of cautious cardinals, chose dissolution not for heresy but for political necessity. A move to preserve unity, to pacify Philip, to make the scandal go away. Historians still argue whether Clement believed the order guilty or if he was simply outmaneuvered. Most agree it was a compromise soaked in cowardice. A betrayal not of doctrine, but of dignity. You recall a sermon from years ago. The strongest tree is not the tallest, but the one that bends in the storm. You suppose Clement bent. You did not. And maybe that's why you're here planting onions instead of leading charges or counting coin. The irony isn't lost on you. You took vows to defend the Holy Land. Now your hands are stained with compost, not blood. You were meant to stand beside kings. Now you trade root vegetables with novices who don't know what acre even means. And yet, there's peace in it. Not contentment exactly, but a kind of quiet obedience. You're not who you were, but you are still something. Still someone. And in that fragile identity, you begin to build again. You take to copying texts in the scriptorium. Latin, mostly. The occasional Greek. You write slowly, methodically. When no one's looking, you sketch little crosses in the margins. They're not red. They're not worn on your chest. But they're there. You begin to teach the younger monks sword forms, not for war, but for posture. Balance. Precision. You call it moving meditation, and they laugh until they fall into rhythm. Sometimes you even smile. You still keep the rule. The old one. Not because anyone demands it, but because you do. You still sleep on hard boards. Still eat only what's served. Still bow your head when the name of Christ is spoken, not out of habit, but out of something deeper. Something the flames, the scrolls, the trials, and the kings could not burn away. You think about your brothers often. Some were executed, some were imprisoned. Some disappeared, slipping into new orders under new names. But you remained. Not visible, not glorious, just faithful. And in that quiet faith, you carry the order forward, not in banners or buildings, but in bone. One night, beneath a moonless sky, you walk to the edge of the orchard and look up at the stars. No one sees you. No one cheers. But in that moment, you feel it. You are still a Templar, even if no one else knows. Even if the world has moved on. Even if the parchment says otherwise. You exist, and so does the vow. The monastery is quiet after dusk. It always is. But tonight, the quiet feels heavier, like a pause before something inevitable. You sit in the cloister, a candle flickering beside you. A breeze stirs the hem of your robe. Your hands, once strong enough to draw a warhorse to its knees, now tremble faintly as you hold the quill. You're writing not a ledger, not a confession, not a decree. A letter to no one in particular. Or perhaps to everyone who might one day wonder what happened to the Knights Templar. You begin simply, "We were not perfect, but we were not what they said." The words come slowly at first, but then like a flood held too long. Your thoughts spill across the parchment. You write about the brotherhood, the camaraderie, the absurd inside jokes, told during vigils, the sound of chainmail in the dark before dawn, the silent awe when first touching the walls of Jerusalem. You write of fear too, of when the fortresses fell, of the sickening silence after a charge that cost more than it gained, of the chill of interrogation rooms and the dull ache of being abandoned by those who once kissed your ring. You write of faith not just in God, but in each other. And you write of the cross. Not the one they burned on your chest in effigy, not the one that decorated banners torn down by kings, but the one you still see when you close your eyes. The cross that meant duty, discipline, sacrifice. You sign the letter with no name, just the symbol you always carried in your heart. A red cross inked quietly in the corner. Historians still argue whether any such letters survived. Some claim fragments were found in northern France, written in careful Latin by unknown hands. Others dismiss them as forgeries, the wishful invention of later romanticists, eager to polish the legend. You don't care. You didn't write it for them. You wrote it because some truths deserve to be spoken, even if only to a silent flame. Later, while shelving scrolls in the Abbey's dusty library, you come across a worn volume, De Laude Novae Militia, The Praise of the New Knighthood, penned by Bernard of Clairvaux himself centuries ago. Its pages still whisper like dry leaves, but the words strike you like thunder. They live as one not for themselves, but for Christ. You sit with the book for a long while, fingers resting on those words. They feel like a benediction, like a memory that finally returned home. The young novices begin asking questions. One saw the faint outline of your old scar and wondered how a monk ended up with a blade wound across his shoulder. Another spotted you kneeling longer than required and asked why. You don't tell them everything, but you tell them enough. That faith is heavier when worn with armor. That silence is sometimes the strongest answer, That serving a broken world with integrity will always make you dangerous to those who prefer control. They listen, and just a few start standing a little straighter. They tie their robes tighter. They bow their heads a second longer at the altar. You do not preach. You merely are. And that is enough. One day, decades from now, they might find your name carved small in the back of a missal, or whispered in a story told at midnight. But even if they don't, you were here. You endured. You remembered. And in the remembering, the order still breathes. Spring returns to the monastery with a kind of soft stubbornness. First, the snowmelt trickles beneath the orchard walls. Then green pushes up through frost-bitten ground, tentative as if checking to see whether it's truly safe. And finally, the birds return, too loud too early as they always are. Life insists on itself, and so do you. You're older now, slower in the joints. There's a permanent bend to your spine earned not from prayer, but from years of quiet service and sorrow. But your eyes still burn with that faint, enduring light, the one you carried across deserts, across courtrooms, across silence. You take to walking the orchard paths just after matins, alone wrapped in a coarse cloak, tracing steps you know by heart. The novices have names for you now. The quiet one, Brother Thorn, the knight who prays with his eyes open. They don't know your past. Not fully, but they sense it. You think sometimes of the last true conversation you had with another Templar. It was years ago, more than a decade by now, in a shared prison cell that smelled of rust and endings. "I thought we would die in battle," he had whispered. "Not in shadows." You remember answering, "We are not dead, and you still aren't." Because here you are teaching young hands to copy psalms, showing them how to fold corners on maps, helping the baker mend a broken bread oven with techniques you learned in Antioch of all places. You chuckle at that one. Who knew siege masonry would come in handy for buns? Historians still debate how many Templars faded into monastic life. Some records suggest hundreds. Others claim only a few scattered survivors. But what they overlook is this: you didn't disappear. You blended, like ink into parchment, like salt into water, like memory into silence. In a strange way, you've become more influential than ever. Not through force, but through example. The monks you guide now grow into men of quiet conviction. They know the rule even if they don't call it that. They speak with restraint, act with precision, and keep their promises like they were born beneath banners they've never seen. Sometimes you hear them humming the old marching songs tunes you thought lost to flame and fear. Where did they hear them? You never taught them. Or did you? It's hard to know what slips from soul to soul when words are few and presence is strong. One evening, the abbot hands you a letter from a bishop's scribe. It references an anonymous advisor from your monastery whose wisdom helped resolve a bitter land dispute in the nearby valley. The bishop wishes to send thanks. You smile but do not reply. You did not help for gratitude. You helped because justice matters. Even if no one sees. Even if the world thinks you're just an old monk with a limp and a long stare. Even if the cross has long since vanished from your chest, it is still carved into your spine, and that's enough. You find yourself speaking aloud more now, but only in prayer. You pray for your brothers, for those still suffering in silence, for those who lost faith, and for those who never found it but tried anyway. You pray not to be remembered, only to be faithful. The orchard blooms around you, the bells ring, the days pass. You do not seek to change the world, but somehow without trying you already have. Because the vow was never about conquest, It was about constancy. And constancy is contagious. The rains come early this year. Soft, steady, the kind that soaks everything without drama. The kind that turns dust into mud and mud into growth. The kind that makes you ache in the joints but also smell the earth with every breath. A baptism of sorts. One the world didn't ask for but sorely needed. You sit by the window with a cup of barley broth listening. The novices are debating some minor point of scripture behind you. You half listen, half smile. It reminds you of the councils back in Acre, only with less shouting and fewer swords laid on the table. You no longer need to interject. They are learning to think for themselves, and that perhaps is your greatest legacy. You recall something a younger brother once said during the campaign in Tripoli. A leader's best work is the day he's no longer needed. You didn't understand it then. You were still full of fire, eager to carve your significance into the walls of history. Now you understand. Now you're just carving initials into the wooden prayer bench when no one's watching. Sometimes late at night when the wind howls down the hills like an old ghost, you remember the faces. The ones who didn't make it. Who vanished into flames or dungeons or silence. You try to say their names aloud, not as ghosts but as friends. Geoffroy, Andre, Lucas, Brother Oswin with the crooked nose, Brother Thierry who could fix any saddle with 3 nails and a prayer. You say them so they won't disappear entirely. Historians still argue about the Order's death. Was it a fall from grace? A tragic political sacrifice? A necessary dismantling of unchecked power? They debate in journals and panels and footnotes. But you just remember. The way Thierry would braid his beard before battle, calling it his lucky rope. The way Oswin could sleep through a siege but wake instantly if someone moved his boots. The way de Molay used to hum hymns off key when he thought no one was listening. Those memories are sharper than any official chronicle. They are truth. And truth whispered in the dark is sometimes stronger than truth shouted in courts. One of the younger monks finds you alone and asks gently if you regret it. All of it, he asks. The wars. The silence, the fall. You stare at your calloused hands for a long time before answering. No, you say. Not all of it. Just the forgetting. Because that's what hurts, really. Not that the Order ended, but that so many people forgot why it began. To protect the weak. To serve without question. To die if needed, but never to kill for pride. The novice nods, unsure if he fully understands. You smile. One day you will. And maybe he will. Because legacies aren't just passed down through banners and books. They're passed down through glances, through choices, through the way you carry a bowl, or how you hold a door, even how you forgive. You spend that night writing a second letter. This one is shorter. It says simply, "Do not fear when the world calls you irrelevant. Fear only the moment you stop being useful to the good." You leave it tucked between Psalms 18 and 19 in the library. No one will find it for years, but when they do, they'll read it and wonder who wrote it. And maybe they'll pick up the vow again. Not in armor, but in intent. You extinguish your candle and lie on your straw bed, hands crossed over your chest. The rain keeps falling. Soft, steady, unstoppable. The years fold over you like old parchment. Not quickly, not painfully, just naturally, like dusk easing into night. You wake one morning and realize your knees no longer argue they've surrendered. Your hands shake more when holding a quill than they ever did holding a sword. The mirror, when you glance at it, rarely reflects a face that no longer feels like yours. And still you are at peace. You spend more time now with the bees. No one asked you to. You simply wandered toward the apiary one day and never quite left. The novices joke that the bees like you. You suspect it's because you never flinch. They sense steadiness, discipline, a stillness they understand. You sit by the hives and watch them work, tireless, precise, oblivious to the politics of kings or the fall of orders. Their entire universe is nectar and return, nectar and return. In a way you envy them. You think often of Acre, not the battles or banners, but the small things. The cracked basin in the infirmary courtyard, the dog that used to sneak scraps near the stables. The sound of early prayers echoing through limestone corridors while the city still slept. You remember how you believed the walls of the order would never fall. But they did. And you learned finally that stone isn't what holds us up. Purpose is. Historians still debate how much of the Templars' rule was divine versus economic. Some insist it was all about power banking land. Others cling to the spiritual mandate protect pilgrims serve. Christ vow obedience, poverty, chastity. You've lived both sides. You've guarded ledgers, and you've whispered final prayers into the ears of dying brothers. It wasn't one or the other, it was both. Always both. You pass your days transcribing text, now mostly proverbs. Sometimes when no one's looking, you slip a line from your past into the margins. A knight without honor is a sword without edge. No one notices. Yet. But someday they will. One winter evening, your breath clouding the air in the candlelit chapel, you bow your head and feel something release inside you. Not pain, not regret. Just a loosening, a surrender that feels like the closing of a book rather than a fall. You don't fear death. You fear only being unfinished, but you aren't. You've sown seeds in silence. You've rebuilt not with marble, but with memory. You've kept the vow even when the world stopped caring. Especially then. Because faith is never louder than when it's practiced in obscurity. One morning your hands don't rise for prayer, your breath doesn't fog the window, and the bees hum on without you. The monks find you still, and peaceful fingers resting on a half-copied psalm. They bury you beneath a cypress tree at the edge of the orchard, where the rain gently kisses the soil and the wind smells faintly of wax and honey. They do not carve Templar on your marker. They don't need to. Anyone who walked beside you already knows. And anyone who didn't will feel it. In the rhythm of the prayers, in the way the novices stand straighter, speak softer. Serve without complaint, in the invisible legacy of a man who never asked for remembrance, but lived in such a way that remembrance became inevitable. Years pass, the monastery changes. Novices come age rise and eventually leave some to other abbeys, some to towns where they become priests, scribes, or healers. The chapel roof is repaired. The old garden wall collapses in a storm and is rebuilt with local stone and young hands. But your memory lingers. They still walk the orchard path you favored in the early hours. They still kneel longer at the foot of the altar. A few still pause by the apiary and mutter blessings under their breath. No one speaks of it directly. There's no statue, no plaque, just habit. Quiet, faithful habit. That is your gravestone, and it is more enduring than marble. One day a traveling scholar arrives, bent under book's eyes bright with questions. He's researching forgotten orders. He asks about ancient texts, obscure traditions, unusual phrasing and marginalia. He flips through old psalters and smiles when he finds a small cross inked in red. "What's this?" he asks. The monk guiding him shrugs. "We don't know. One of the old brothers left it. We call it his silent mark." The scholar smiles. He's seen it before. in a monastery in Portugal, on a map in the archives of Leon, etched into the wood of a tiny chapel bench in Sardinia. The same cross, not grand, not ornate, just consistent. He doesn't say anything, but that night he copies the symbol into his journal, writes one word beneath it, endured. Historians still argue about whether the Templar ideals truly survived, whether the quiet men who bore no titles but lived by the rule were remnants or reinventions. You wouldn't care. You didn't act to be studied. You acted because service was your compass even when the map was taken away. Even when your name was stripped. Even when your purpose had to be stitched back together from broken liturgies, fading muscle and memory. Somewhere far from the monastery, a merchant touches a coin with a faded red cross and wonders who made it. A child plays near an old ruin that once bore the sigil of your commandery, unaware that he is climbing on history. A young scribe fumbling in a cathedral archive stumbles upon a rulebook with your handwriting in the margins. Tight, clean, with one line underlined, not to be served, but to serve. The world does not remember you loudly, but it remembers you correctly, quietly, faithfully, as a pattern that repeats not in triumph, but in resilience. That's the thing about vows. When taken honestly, they outlive the taker. Not through echoes, but through example. You once rode into battle under the sun, the white mantle blazing behind you like a comet. Now your legacy rides quietly through grain fields, over monastery floors beneath candlelit chapels where no one speaks your name. And yet, you are there. In every act of silent courage, in every moment someone chooses integrity over ease, in every life rebuilt not from power but from principle. This is not just survival, this is resurrection. You've become a story, not a tale of conquest or scandal like the ones whisper about kings or crusades. No, your story is quieter, like smoke curling beneath a chapel door. It drifts through time in pieces, a phrase here, a habit, there a symbol scratched beneath a stone basin by a curious hand long ago. A legend not by design, but by persistence. A young monk in a distant abbey wears his belt in the old style. He doesn't know why. It just feels correct. A sister tending to the poor in Marseille uses a coin stamped with a fading red cross to pay for medicine. The apothecary fingers it and smiles, remembering the stories. And somewhere in Rhodes, a weathered codex is passed from one archivist to another, too fragile to bind, too sacred to ignore. It's filled with rules written in Old Latin, annotated in a hand no one can name, but everyone agrees, is precise, patient, and firm. They call it the rule of the silent brother. And so without monuments or banners, your legacy breathes. Not through power, through pattern. Historians still argue about what mattered most in the order: the wealth. The military might, the secret rites whispered about in taverns and pulpits alike, but the ones who really understand, they know. It wasn't the gold or the garrisons, it was the discipline, the vow. The idea that a man could live not for himself but for others. That silence could be holy. That obedience, when rooted in conscience, could be stronger than any king's decree. And now, that idea lives in people who've never heard your name. A young farmer choosing honesty at cost to himself. A magistrate refusing a bribe because some things aren't for sale. A teacher telling her students to protect the weak even when it's inconvenient. They don't know they are echoing a Templar. But you do. Because every small act of virtue carried out in solitude with no promise of reward is a stone laid in your unseen cathedral. And what a cathedral it has become. No one guards its door, no one rings its bells, but it stands and grows. You once believed glory came with banners, marches, and the clash of swords under a holy sky. But now, in the slow and sacred quiet, you see clearly glory is a habit, not a headline. It's the way you rose every day long after the world stopped noticing. It's the way you carried water, copied texts, knelt in prayer, and held your silence with dignity. That is your order now, not the Knights Templar, but the keepers of the unseen vow. And they are everywhere. They don't need symbols, because they've learned to recognize each other by the way they walk, by the way they serve. In a tucked-away corner of a cathedral in northern Europe, one so old it's more moss than mortar, a mason repairing a cracked pillar discovers something. A sigil, not grand, just a small red cross etched where no one would think to look, hidden under layers of soot and time. The sort of mark someone leaves not for fame but for the future. He calls the bishop calls the archivist. The archivist just smiles. "I've seen this before," she says. "On a chalice base in Lisbon, on a tile in an old priory in Toulouse. It's not vandalism, it's a footprint. They document it, of course, take photos, archive the findings." Another curious entry in the long ledger of lost medieval symbols. But none of them say it aloud. That this might not be just another carving. That this might be someone. You. Or someone like you. One of the many who bore the vow long after the order fell, long after the papers were burned, and the relics stolen and the myths twisted into theater. Historians still debate the extent of the Templar underground, if such a thing existed at all. Were there really secret meetings in alpine caves? Hidden vaults beneath churches? Scrolls passed hand to hand in coded Latin. You would laugh if you could. The truth was never that dramatic. It was simpler, and more enduring. A whisper here, a lesson there, a habit quietly inherited. You didn't need secret tunnels. You had time, because you knew something most people forget. The world forgets fast, but virtue practiced consistently outlasts forgetting. In the cloisters of Spain, a sister abbess corrects a novice for wasting wax during evening vespers. She doesn't know that her rule of resourcefulness mirrors a forgotten Templar directive. In a small village near the Black Sea, an old man teaches his grandchildren to stand still during storms, to face the wind like a knight. He doesn't know why he says it, just that his grandfather did. These aren't accidents. They're echoes. And you are the source. You were never trying to be remembered. You were trying to be faithful. And now you see how even the smallest acts, when done with consistency, humility, and purpose, become seeds. Seeds that outlive regimes, outlast popes, outshine crowns, and grow into forests of quiet virtue across continents. You are a myth to some, a cautionary tale to others. But to the few who still listen between the lines of history, you are something more, a reminder. That sacredness does not depend on titles. That service can survive betrayal. That dignity, when practiced in secret, becomes unbreakable. You once stood behind shields and fortress walls. Now you stand behind candlelight and conscience. You were forged in fire, refined in silence, and finally dispersed into the world not as a name but as a note in a symphony of human endurance. And if anyone ever asks what became of the Templars, let them be still. Let them look inward. Let them ask what became of the vow. Because that's where you still are, in the vow, living, breathing, guiding, always. Centuries from your final breath, a museum somewhere places a battered piece of armor behind glass. It isn't flashy, no gold inlay, no famous name engraved on the collar, just iron, heavy, functional. A bit of faded red pigment still clinging to the chest. Beside it, a placard reads, "Believed to be Templar. Provenance unclear, likely ceremonial." People walk past it with coffee in hand. Maps folded in back pockets, earbuds tucked in. Some linger, most don't. A few children press their faces to the glass, imagining battles and secret codes. One even asks his mother, were they the good guys? She doesn't answer, just shrugs. That's fair, because you never fit cleanly into good or bad. You were human. You made mistakes, but you tried. And sometimes trying when the world stops expecting it of you is the most radical act. In a quiet corner of a monastery library, the last handwritten copy of a rulebook still exists. Not in any database. Just in a locked drawer that only one aging librarian knows how to open. He flips through it sometimes when the power goes out and the modern world hums to a halt. He doesn't know your name, but he feels your order in the phrasing, in the care with which the words are written, in the silence between the lines. That's the thing no empire ever learned in time. You can erase symbols. You can burn flags. You can even dismantle organizations. But you cannot kill habits of the soul. Historians still argue whether your discipline was military genius or spiritual devotion, whether you were tools of power or pawns of popes, whether your code was honorable or outdated. Let them argue. You didn't write the rulebook for them. You wrote it for the brother to your left, for the sister at the gate, for the poor man on the road, for the quiet student who one day might carry a piece of your spirit in how he opens a door or finishes what he starts. And now your work is done, not because it was completed, but because it was continued. You were a chapter, not the book. And what a chapter it was. From desert storms to fortress walls, from dungeon prayers to orchard paths, from blazing banners to forgotten scrolls, you lived it all. And you held the vow, even when the church betrayed you, even when kings hunted you, even when history misunderstood you. Especially then. Because vows aren't for when it's easy. They're for when the lights go out. You hear stories now and then through other people's eyes. Stories of secret orders, of guardians in the shadows, of maps leading to lost Templar treasure buried beneath ancient stone. You smile at these tales. The real treasure was never in vaults. It was in your quiet refusal to become what your enemies claimed you were. The silence you kept, the rule you followed, the life you lived, not for glory, but for good. And when someone somewhere kneels alone in an empty chapel and whispers, "Guide me, they will never know whose footsteps they follow." But you will, and you'll answer, not with thunder, but with memory. The map of Europe has changed so many times by now you'd barely recognize it. Kingdoms have fractured and fused borders redrawn with every war and treaty. Cities you knew as outposts are now capitals. Abbeys where you once prayed are museums. Roads you guarded are now paved with asphalt and choked with traffic. And yet, under it all, the bones of your world remain. Beneath a parking lot in southern France, someone finds foundation stones massive cut with skill and purpose, the kind that once formed commandery walls. They dig, they date, they publish. The report reads likely 13th century. Associated with known Templar stronghold, the article makes the rounds. Templar hashtags trend for a week. Someone starts a podcast. But then just as quickly the attention fades like it always does. Because the world is noisy now. Loud, frantic, always looking forward, rarely looking deep. Still, a few pause. A few feel something stir when they hear the word Templar. Not just mystery, not just myth. A kind of stillness, a sense that somewhere underneath the noise there is order. Historians still argue about what that order actually was. Some insist it was economic brilliance, Europe's first multinational corporation complete with a banking system ahead of its time. Others highlight the military innovation, light cavalry tactics, layered command hierarchies, architectural genius, and fortress design. But you know the truth. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about war. It was about witness. About being a presence in a world constantly slipping into chaos. A red cross on a white mantle wasn't just a uniform, it was a promise that someone was watching. That someone had taken a vow not to abandon the weak. That someone would stand still when others fled. You didn't always succeed. You made grave mistakes, but you always stood. And now, centuries later, that simple act of standing, of refusing to run from duty, resonates more loudly than any archive or artifact. In Berlin, a young woman volunteers at a shelter. She wears a pin shaped like a cross. Doesn't know where she got it, just feels right. In the Philippines, a man teaching philosophy uses your rule as an example of discipline without cruelty. In Canada, a group of veterans organizes quiet aid missions under the name Silent Order. No official ties, just inspiration. They don't know your name, but they carry your vow. The world has no shortage of ambition, but it has a drought of discipline with compassion. That's your legacy now. Not power, not revenge, not glory, but a kind of gentle defiance. A refusal to believe the world can't be better. One action at a time. One vow upheld in the dark. So even as the world spins forward fast breathless, forgetting you remain. In stillness, in steadiness. In the hands of those who believe that honor isn't outdated. It's just quiet now. And in a time of noise, quiet may be the most radical thing of all. You are no longer a man. You are a pattern, woven into things that don't bear your name but echo your rhythm. You see it now in places you never would have expected, on the wrists of medics tying tourniquets with reverent precision in the fingers of archivists, restoring old texts with painstaking care in the bowed heads of people who choose to help instead of hurry. This is what your vow has become. A ghost, yes, but not the haunting kind. You are the kind of ghost that steadies a shaking hand, that whispers, "Stay," when a lesser voice says, "Run," that lingers at the edge of sacred choices. One could argue that all you ever were was a container for this idea. This commitment to service through action, not posture. Through integrity, not recognition. And though the original order was stamped out, trialed, burned, dissolved by decree, its essence was never in the seals or swords. It was always in the silence, the daily vow, the ordinary moment taken seriously. Historians still argue if you were saints or sinners, conspirators or scapegoats, a holy brotherhood or a convenient bank to be plundered. There are books, theories, debates that span centuries. But in a quiet corner of an old Parisian bookstore, a curious traveler buys a dog-eared copy of your rule, translated in humble, tucked between outdated travel guides and forgotten paperbacks. She reads it on the train home. It changes her. She doesn't tell anyone. She just begins to wake earlier, to write more carefully, to carry herself with a kind of dignified quiet. She volunteers, she forgives faster, she lights candles when no one's looking. You are there. Not in the book. In her. You never needed followers, you needed witnesses. People who could sense your shape in the fog, who could carry a cross not on their back, but in their behavior. That's how ideas survive when institutions fall. Not by force, but by invitation. You never knocked. You never shouted. You simply waited in the habits of the faithful and the choices of the kind and the discipline of those who refuse to let the world make them bitter. You see it now more clearly than ever. A surgeon washing their hands before a procedure like it's a ritual. A firefighter crossing themselves before a rescue not for show but for focus. A teacher pausing at the door of her classroom to collect herself before stepping into chaos, not because she has to, but because she chooses to serve well. These are not modern Templars. They are not part of any secret order. But they are the vow incarnate, just like you were. And so your story continues fractured, reinterpreted, reborn in unexpected ways. Not because of legend, but because of living. Because someone once chose to keep going when the world gave them every excuse to stop. That someone was you. And now, that someone is them. The seasons turn again. Time, as always, forgets to ask permission. In the ruins of an old chapel roof long gone, ivy curled up the altar, a group of hikers takes shelter from an afternoon storm. One of them touches the worn stones and finds something strange beneath the moss, a carving. Shallow, crude, barely visible. A cross. Not decorative, not part of a larger pattern. Just there. Alone. Deliberate. They take a picture, of course. Post it online with a caption like Forgotten Templar Site. The algorithm gives it a short life 12 hours of curiosity, 3 snarky comments, and a flood of actually replies from self-declared experts. But one person sees the image and feels something stir. Not nostalgia, recognition. Because she's been carving her own small cross in her own small way. Not into stone, but into her daily life. Through choices. Like biting her tongue instead of firing back in anger. Like double-checking her work when no one's watching. Like choosing to listen longer than is convenient. She's never worn armor. Never taken formal vows. But somehow she knows that cross. Has always known it. She bookmarks the image, prints it, and pins it above her desk. It doesn't say Knights Templar, it just says, remember who you are when no one's looking. Historians still try to define the Templars by what they left behind: swords, coins, buildings, bones. Tangible things. But your true legacy was never about what could be touched. It was about what could be trusted. That someone somewhere would still choose honor, even if the law allowed cruelty. That someone would rise with dignity even when the world knelt to corruption. That someone would keep serving long after applause stopped. In Tokyo, a programmer keeps a sticky note on his monitor. Protect the weak. He doesn't remember where he heard it, only that it feels right. In Nairobi, a nurse finishes her shift and whispers a prayer to no one in particular. She crosses herself not because it's tradition, but because it centers her. They don't know each other, they don't know you, but they carry the thread. That thin, invisible line drawn from your vow centuries ago, stretched across oceans and lifetimes, still humming quietly. You used to believe you needed a fortress to be strong. Now you know strength is quiet, steady, invisible until it's needed. And by the time it's seen, it's already done its work. You are no longer bound by geography, no longer limited by orders or uniforms. You are breath, idea, compass. You are the shape that virtue takes when it stops asking for permission. So the next time someone asks if the Knights Templar still exist, let them wonder, let them search the ruins, let them dig through archives. Meanwhile, you'll be in a nurse's hand, a teacher's spine, a night shift worker's quiet decision to keep going. Still here. Still serving. Just harder to find, and exactly where you need to be. Night falls gently across a countryside dotted with ruins. Somewhere not far from the Whispering Fields, a small chapel stands. No tourists, no candles, no ceremony. Just stone warmed by centuries and silence so deep you could pour prayers into it. A traveler slips inside. She's not here for a pilgrimage. She's just curious, or so she thinks. The door creaks behind her. Dust swirls in her flashlight beam. At the far end, a carved bench still stands worn smooth where countless knees once pressed. She sits expecting nothing. And yet, something in the air shifts. Not dramatic. No voices. No ghostly figures rising from the shadows. Just stillness. A kind of listening. She breathes, deeply surprised by her own stillness in return. For a moment she feels she's not alone, not in the eerie sense, but in the familiar sense. As if someone who once stood exactly where she's sitting left behind something more than footprints. She notices a tiny symbol beneath the edge of the bench. Faint, almost playful. It's the same cross she saw online months ago. Her breath catches. It means nothing to most. A relic, a curiosity, the stuff of conspiracy documentaries and dusty books. But to her, it's an anchor. She smiles, because she understands now that the true treasures of the Templars were never locked away in catacombs or buried under pyramids. They were sewn into choices, into habits, into tiny deliberate acts of discipline and decency repeated again and again until they outlived the stone walls meant to contain them. Historians still chase relics. Tourists still pose beside swords. Screenwriters still invent secret codes. But your real story lives here in this moment of quiet connection between a stranger and a symbol in the unspoken thread she now carries without needing to name it. You are no longer a knight. You are a node in a long song haunting subtle passed down not by blood but by behavior. You're the breath before a promise, the pause before a vow, the heartbeat behind integrity. And tonight, as the chapel cools and the stars climb into position overhead, you rest. Not because the world is fixed, but because your part in fixing it has been passed on. And they, these unexpected heirs to your vow, will not carry swords. They'll carry groceries, books, first aid kits, kindness, and they'll walk steady. Because someone like you once walked first. The world you knew is gone now. But the values you lived by, they're surprisingly resilient. Honor, patience, service, restraint. These aren't relics, they're resources. Quiet tools the modern world still uses, even if it no longer remembers where they came from. Somewhere in Istanbul, a philosophy professor starts her class by writing 4 words on the board duty, without reward expected. She never cites you, she doesn't need to. Your code has filtered into thought, into culture, into people who'd scoff at medievalism, but still live like knights when no one's looking. In Buenos Aires, a mechanic helps an elderly neighbor every morning before work. When asked why, he just shrugs and says feels right. In Hanoi, a woman spends her weekends teaching rural children how to read no foundation, no publicity. When offered payment, she says, "This isn't a job. It's a promise." You recognize that language. Even without swords or seals, you'd recognize them. They carry the same discipline, the same stubborn kindness, the same refusal to surrender to convenience or cynicism. They are not Templars in name, but they are Templars in spirit. Historians still dismiss this idea. Romantic nonsense, they say. There's no lineage, they're right in a way. There's no official lineage. Just something older. stronger, human. You see it every time someone rises when they could stay seated. Every time someone chooses to protect rather than profit. Every time someone accepts silence over self-promotion. You used to believe that faith was something worn on armor and rings and chants shouted across battlefield winds. Now you know better. Faith is quiet. It's how a man stacks firewood for a stranger. How a child shares their meal. How someone chooses peace over pettiness even when no one's watching. You are not remembered for the wars you fought. You are remembered for how you ended them, with honor, with humility, with the understanding that legacy is not what you leave behind, but what you ignite in others. And tonight, as the moon hangs heavy over quiet fields and flickers of candlelight dance in places you've never seen someone you'll never meet, chooses to do the right thing without praise, without witnesses. You'll never know their name, but they carry yours. There's a place barely a speck on modern maps where 2 footpaths cross in the shadow of a collapsed tower. No signs, no plaques. Just old stone, mossy and cracked, lying where it fell centuries ago. But locals still avoid the center of the ruins at night. Not out of fear, out of respect. They say the wind sounds different there. Not haunted exactly, just watchful. A shepherd once claimed he saw a figure in white during a snowstorm standing motionless where the altar used to be. Another said her grandmother left bread there on feast days just in case. No one's entirely sure what they're honoring, only that it feels right, and somehow important. You would smile at this, not because they believe in ghosts, but because they're still practicing reverence long after your name has slipped from memory. That's the truest test of any vow. Does it outlive the one who made it? Does it ripple unseen through time? Not as command, but as instinct. Historians still argue whether the Templars were ever truly dissolved. Some suggest underground cells survived into the Renaissance. Others insist all of that is fiction romantic nonsense, fueled by novels and national myths. But here's what they miss: survival doesn't require structure, only transmission. The passing of intention from one hand to another through habits, values, choices. You're not a secret society. You're a shared impulse. You're in the soldier who patches a rival's wound because he's still a man. You're in the baker who leaves bread on the windowsill for the hungry because someone once did that for her. You're in the father who teaches his children not to boast, not because it's trendy, but because quiet strength lasts longer. These aren't accidents, they are inherited echoes, and you, dear knight, are their source. You were never meant to be eternal in body, but you have become perpetual in practice. A living rhythm gently repeating in the souls of people who believe not in banners or creeds, but in quiet courage. And so tonight, while stars wheel overhead, and another century slips quietly into the next you remain. Not where people seek you, but where people are you. In small sanctuaries of dignity, in fragile moments of grace, in the vow reborn in hearts that never knew its name but chose to live it anyway. Hey guys, tonight we trace the final threads of your story not through glory or defeat, but through quiet legacy. You don't need to brace yourself. You've already crossed deserts, stood in fortress shadows, endured betrayal, and lived long enough to see myths replace memories. And yet you're still here. A little slower now. A little more. Still. The world doesn't know it's carrying you. It just does. Somewhere a monk walks through a cloister at dawn feet, brushing wet stone candle in hand. He's never heard your name, but the way he bows, steady, humble, precise, is something you would recognize. It's a posture you practiced in 100 chapels 1,000 mornings ago. Across the ocean in a glass skyscraper, someone finishes a report no one will read. But she does it well. Because doing things well, even unnoticed, still matters. And that's something you taught her, though she doesn't know it. A firefighter removes his helmet and bows his head after saving someone who'll never know his name. He doesn't know the rule, but he lives it. A child returns a lost wallet without opening it. No sermon, no guidance, just instinct. You never sought immortality. And yet through discipline you became unkillable. Historians still hunt for treasure, for vaults beneath temples, for scrolls that decode lost secrets. Let them, because the real treasure was never under the floorboards. It was under the skin. The quiet muscle memory of kindness, the tilt of the head toward humility, the deep breath before choosing service over spectacle. They thought they could bury you, but you are a vow, and vows, when kept long enough, turn into ways of being. So sleep now, brother. Sleep watcher. Sleep bearer of quiet oaths. You've been carried by centuries, and now you're carried by character. May your name be forgotten, and may your vow be lived. And now, dear listener, the night folds softly around you. Let the breath slow. Let the muscles slacken. You've traveled across centuries, through deserts and cathedrals, over oceans and under starlit ruins. You've stood where knights once swore oaths, where silence grew louder than banners, and where purpose outlived power. But this is no longer a story about battles or kings. It's about you. About the part of you that chooses to rise, gently speak kindly, serve quietly. You carry something old now, not in your hands, but in your habits. You've inherited a vow without needing the ceremony. So as your eyelids grow heavy, remember, you don't need to change the world to honor the vow. You just need to keep showing up. With steadiness, with care, with dignity that doesn't demand an audience. The world is already noisy enough. You've earned this stillness. You've earned the right to rest. So sink into the quiet now, as soft as candle smoke, as sure as memory. Let the hum of your breath be the only banner you raise tonight. No one is watching. No one needs to. Because you are keeping the vow even in your sleep. Good night, gentle soul. The world is better for having carried your quiet legacy. End of script. Sweet dreams.